Like it or not, every detail about your life is being sold and distributed to a preposterous amount of companies without your consent. The data brokerage industry that spearheads this movement is currently valued at $264.2 billion and is expected to swell to $500 billion by 2032. Gone are the days of selling tangible goods and services to stimulate the economy like the Silk Roads of old. Today's market thrives off capturing an asset more precious than the rarest gold nugget you could get your hands on, your attention. As we uncover the world of data brokerages, I want you to know it's not all bad news bears, but be aware that the lack of governmental regulation protecting our rights as citizens is staggering. Data brokers are companies that secretly collect, aggregate, and infer data about individuals for the purposes of selling and sharing it. Companies gather and derive this information from many sources, including by scraping public records, using web crawlers, embedding code into mobile apps, and paying companies to sell data on their own customers with virtually no oversight. Data brokers traffic in all types of personal information, including detailed location information and health information, purchase history and browsing history. Alone or combined, that information can reveal the most intimate details of our lives. Our movements, habits, associations, health conditions, and ideologies. As the data broker industry proliferates, companies have enormous financial incentives to collect consumers' personal data, while data brokers have little financial incentive to protect consumer data. For these companies, consumers are the product, not the customer. Companies also maintain information about consumers that is often inaccurate, wrongfully denying them credit, housing, or even a job. The buyers of this data span include advertising firms, insurance providers, banks, and financial institutions. How about U.S. law enforcement agencies, abusive individuals, and criminal scammers, and potentially even foreign actors? These companies purchase packages of data of groups of individuals with shared characteristics, ranging from datasets on heavy coffee drinkers to avid podcast listeners with a clear end goal in mind. The indoctrination is seemingly so innocent and subtle right before your eyes, as your subconscious is bombarded with brand messaging targeted toward each company's ideal customer profile that can algorithmically predict which customers will repeatedly purchase their product and associate its usage as integral to their core identity. Well-known companies like Google or Meta do not fit the core definition of data brokers. Although search engines and social networks also sell data, they mostly collect it directly from their users. In contrast, data brokers operate more indirectly as intermediaries. They do not have users themselves, but customers who purchase data rather than generate it. Data brokers operate at the intersection of various stakeholders and actors within the data ecosystem, serving as largely invisible intermediaries. The brokers themselves are typically indifferent to who uses the data they sell or for what purposes, like selling data collected for marketing purposes to credit agencies that use it for credit scoring. Regardless of whether data is legally classified as property, there is no denying that data functions as a significant economic asset. All globally successful digital private companies engage in aggressive data extraction from their users. Data trading is a thriving sector of the global digital economy and just one variety of the ongoing datafication of all aspects of life. As the ECJ rightly acknowledged, the specific content of apps and websites is of secondary importance. The primary goal is to keep users engaged on the platform for as long as possible to extract and generate personal data. This objective is further optimized through real-time bidding, where advertisers participate in automated auctions for the opportunity to target specific internet users with ads. From a national security perspective, it is not difficult to obtain sensitive data about active duty members of the military, their families, and veterans, including non-public, individually identified, and sensitive data, such as health data, financial data, and information about religious practices. The harms are numerous. Health insurance companies, among others, have leveraged data brokers to buy up data on hundreds of millions of Americans, including data concerning race, education level, marital status, net worth, and online purchases. Consumers often have no idea this is happening. In similar form, right now, it is far too easy for foreign governments to purchase sensitive data on the demographic information, political preferences and internet search histories, mental health conditions and GPS movements of American citizens, politicians, judges, government officials, and even intelligence officers and members of the military, all without running any substantial controls. This information could be used for profiling, blackmail, intelligence operations, and the design and execution of online disinformation campaigns, and much more. The inconsistencies of controls when purchasing sensitive non-public, individually identified data about active duty members of the military and veterans extends to situations in which data brokers are selling to customers who are outside of the United States. Meaningful policy action is needed to address this ecosystem and mitigate national security risks facing the United States. Foreign governments have historically sought data about American persons and organizations for espionage, election interference, and other purposes. Their interest in the U.S. military in particular is high, and they could obtain such data through the data brokerage ecosystem, either by purchasing it legally or by hacking into the databases of brokers or their customers. For your general civilian, consumers now face the specter of a scored society, where they do not have access to the most basic information on how they are evaluated. The data broker industry's secret algorithms can be used to determine the interest rates on mortgages and credit cards, raise consumer interest rates, or deny people jobs. In one instance, a consumer found that his credit score suffered a 40-point hit simply because he requested accurate information about his mortgage. The use of algorithms can also have widespread discriminatory effects. The Equal Credit Opportunity Act prohibits lenders from discriminating in credit decisions. Still, studies have demonstrated that Black and Latino communities have lower credit scores as groups than whites. Current law does not allow consumers or regulators to evaluate these scores to determine whether they violate the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. Although consumers have the right to request their credit scores, they do not have the right to know how the score is determined. In addition to any errors in their data files, brokers regularly peddle inaccurate inferences about individuals to advertisers, insurers, or any number of other buyers, experts say. These junk inferences, essentially bad predictions about people, can affect everything from someone's web browsing experience all the way to a major financial transaction. Even the top privacy official for the world's largest third-party data brokers, Axiom, acknowledges that the inferences the company sells are not always correct. We want to be as accurate as possible, but our inferences, all they are informed guesses, Axiom's chief privacy officer Jordan Abbott said in an interview. If we tend to guess wrong in the immediate, my hope is it doesn't have any sort of consequences for denial or benefits or eligibility for credit. Another insight comes from McKinsey, who said that third-party data brokers are incentivized to hit scaled targets and place individuals in more categories than are accurate. Worse, there is no way for advertisers to validate the data they are buying from third-party brokers. Primarily, it's the third-party data brokers who are feeding everybody this data on which these pretty crappy audiences are built, McKinsey said. The lack of validation in the ad industry's insatiable appetite for data has led to a race to the bottom by most brokers, who rely on web browsing habits from the open internet, which is at least half fraud. Data from the open internet is really just a shape-shifting world of snake oil. There are billions of IDs that brokers trade in that aren't about people, McKinsey said. It's about devices and IP addresses and mobile IDs that are constantly changing. Many devices are shared by multiple members of the same family, and one IP address can represent a whole apartment complex. Garcia, another pundit, believes that the junk inferences could ultimately put most brokers out of business. Garcia mentioned that at some point marketers will recognize they are paying a premium for useless data, and that the real beneficiaries are the data brokers and other ad tech middlemen themselves, she said. When that happens, it will be very difficult for most data brokers to sustain their business models. When you go on the internet, think about the term internet cookies, as this collection method underpins the third-party data broker business model, and information gleaned from these cookies is in fact often wrong. But even so, soon cookies will begin to disappear. Google is in the process of phasing out third-party cookies in Chrome browsers, which will destroy a key source of information and could pose a major threat to many third-party brokers, experts say. The inaccuracy of data broker inferences has led to a nascent industry dedicated to helping them improve. Scott McKinley worked at audience measurement giant Nielsen for 7 years and evaluated many data brokers as part of his role developing products for the firm. Over time, he noticed that the personal information available to his company to make accurate inferences for advertisers was often poor. In 2019, he started TrueSet, a company focused on helping data brokers understand the quality of their own data so they can improve it. The data brokerage ecosystem also includes third-party companies that have no direct relationship with consumers but still sell data on them. The ecosystem spans large, publicly traded companies such as Experion and Oracle, and smaller privately incorporated data brokers. Oracle has its own data collection arm, but has also built its portfolio by buying up companies like DataRaker, Compendium, and Crosswise. The companies, which were acquired in 2012, 2013, and 2016 respectively, take data from a variety of sources. Oracle also acquired DataLogix in 2014, which connected offline purchases to online profiles. Additionally, Oracle combines datasets from more than 75 other data brokers, which it calls the world's largest collection of third-party data. And the past year also saw concerns raised about how well these brokers protect their massive troves of data. Oracle, for instance, suffered a data breach after security researchers found billions of records from its BluePie data collection were left exposed on a server. Many companies nowadays not only trade in data, but also offer a range of other services. For example, Experion, one of the best-known data brokers and credit agencies, also provides big data solutions. The ongoing demand for fresh data is rising due to the proliferation of highly data-intensive technologies, such as large language models, or LLMs. Following this, there is already speculation about the future of the data trading market once the sources of effectively public data are exhausted. Collectively, data broker spending on lobbying rivaled the spending of individual tech firms like Facebook and Google. There were 25 companies in 2020, for example, whose company spending on federal lobbying totaled $29 million. Many of the top spenders were not pure data brokers, but companies that nonetheless have massive data operations. Oracle, which has spent the past decade acquiring companies that collect data, spent the most by far, with disclosure documents showing $9.57 million spent on federal lobbying. LiveRamp was the top lobbying spender among companies whose primary focus is collecting data for advertising purposes. The company, which connects people's activity across the web and from offline purchases for advertisers, spent $630,000 on lobbying in 2020 on issues such as the Augmenting Compatibility and Competition by Enabling Service Switching Act and the Privacy Shield Act. I'm now going to touch upon a few bills that were meant to pass but didn't make it through. The Privacy Shield was a framework for transferring data between the European Union and the US, but was declared invalid last July for failing to meet the EU's privacy regulations. The Data Accountability and Trust Act looked to establish security standards and required post-breach audits for data brokers, and also prohibits collecting information under false pretenses. The Information Transparency and Personal Data Control Act would have required data brokers to get consent to collect sensitive data and go through an annual privacy audit. The Data Broker Accountability and Transparency Act of 2020 wanted to mandate opt-outs for data brokers, and for the FTC to create a national list of data brokers. And lastly, both COVID-19 data privacy bills look to provide stronger controls over data related to contact tracing. As stated before, none of the bills coincidentally mentioned above passed Congress. Take from that inference what you will about the lobbying effects of data broker companies. Above all, data trading catalyzes the massive informational power asymmetry in the digital sphere. On the one hand, certain companies are able to accumulate vast amounts of data and exclusively use it for their own economic purposes. Consumers, on the other hand, cannot commercially use their own data in a comparable way, nor does the vast majority know who is selling their data and for what purposes. Unregulated data trading exacerbates these problems through opaque transaction chains that obscure responsibilities, undermine the purpose limitation of data, and jeopardize data security. The risk of abuse from the concentration of extremely large data sets about entire populations in the hands of individual actors, whether state or the private, is obvious. Combined with predictive analytics, every detail that can be used to group individuals and assign them characteristics they may not even know about themselves is possible. Whether these inferences are accurate or not, they result in a significant loss of control over self-representation and an infringement with individual autonomy. Discriminatory practices are well documented, and the targeted spread of misinformation to select groups of people poisons public discourse. Additionally, the discussion about the threat to national security is increasing. Unsurprisingly, these vast data troves enable predictions and inferences about almost any individual, including employees of governments, intelligence agencies, or other security-related state authorities. The links between data brokerage and national security have recently attracted more attention, particularly with respect to the Chinese government's collection of data on populations outside of China, including on US citizens. Experts demonstrated concern over the large extent to which the Chinese government could otherwise acquire personal data outside of the collection through apps like TikTok and WeChat, and the risks associated with this data collection. Senator Ron Wyden has repeatedly spoken about these issues, stating in June 2022 that right now it's perfectly legal for a company in China to buy huge databases of sensitive information from data brokers about the movements or health records of millions of Americans and then share that information with the Chinese government. That's a huge problem for our country's security. Senator Cynthia Lummis also said at the time that allowing for an adversary's unrestricted access to Americans' private, sensitive data places U.S. companies at a competitive disadvantage and threatens our national security. A ban on TikTok would do nothing to prevent data brokers from aggregating the same consumer data from other apps and reselling it to commercial entities, including those in China. Two Singapore national security analysts wrote in 2020 that the amount of data stored with data brokers opens them to be prime targets of cyber attacks from state or non-state actors. Many existing privacy laws do not cover data brokerage. For example, The Health Information Portability and Accountability Act, otherwise known as HIPAA, narrowly introduces privacy and security controls on covered health entities like your doctor. It does not, however, cover period tracking apps, virtual therapy apps, data brokers, and many other kinds of companies, which means they are entirely within their rights to sell your data like prescription lists, surgical histories, and much more. They also typically have no recourse because even in the few states like California, where consumers can submit "do not sell my data" requests to companies, data brokers may be unresponsive. Take law enforcement as another example. Currently, law enforcement agencies are allowed to purchase data from companies to spy on Americans without warrants, disclosure, or robust oversight. This is because existing laws akin to the HIPAA and the health data laws do not adequately cover data brokerage in the law enforcement context. As the nonprofit Center for Democracy and Technology wrote in its December 2021 report on the issue, the Electronic Communications Privacy Act effectively contains a loophole allowing law enforcement to acquire communications data commercially from data brokers and evade otherwise applicable requirements that they must use legal processes to obtain data directly from service providers. Many law enforcement agencies purchase data in this way, from the Federal Bureau of Investigation or FBI to Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The lack of a comprehensive baseline U.S. privacy law has allowed the data broker industry to build profiles on millions of Americans at great cost to our privacy, civil rights, national security, and democracy. Where does AI fit into this entire picture? Because as you can imagine, in 2025, there's a lot of talk about artificial intelligence. The previous president of the United States, Joe Biden's recent executive order on AI makes it easier to extract, re-identify, link, infer, and act on sensitive information about people's identities, locations, habits, and desires. Government agencies can do this because they are exploiting outdated court interpretations of the Fourth Amendment and gaps in the country's patchwork of privacy-protecting statutes. The Electronic Communications Privacy Act, for instance, was enacted in 1986, and it hasn't been updated to cover the modern world of mobile applications and commercial data brokers. When it comes to AI, the AI Act unsurprisingly does not address the issue of data trading, but instead only regulates AI systems from the point of market entry, and not the acquisition of the necessary training data beforehand. These are not merely technical developments that benefit society as a whole, but rather socio-technical power shifts that are inherently tied to the business models of the actors involved. No legitimate economic interest justifies the immense data power concentrated in the hands of a few global companies that structurally evade regulatory oversight. A particular interest are those risks that are supercharged by artificial intelligence. AI can fuel inferences about people based on the massive amounts of data that brokers hold about them, including things like their political preference or sexuality. Companies require billions of data points to build and train the algorithms and machine learning models underlying AI tools. Now, with little public data left to ingest, the tech industry is turning to consumers to collect and use their personal data to train their AI systems. A highly invasive data collection practice. AI is powered by algorithms, mathematical procedures, or rule sets that are designed to analyze data, discern patterns, and reach related conclusions. An algorithm is simply a strand of coded instructions for completing a task or solving a problem. But when used to power AI, algorithm structures are far more complex, drawing conclusions based on billions of data points and, on an automated basis, incorporating each conclusion into the next analysis, thus building knowledge. Data is used to train the AI algorithms through a repetitive trial and error process, thus exposing the algorithms to various data points for training. Recent reports reveal that OpenAI, developer of the ChatGPT AI system, used this technology to scrape any data available on the internet to collect and use to train its AI systems, but this data alone is not enough. As a result, OpenAI is developing speech recognition tools to transcribe audio and collect information from YouTube videos and other video sources. According to the Pew Research Center, 81% of American consumers fear that the data collected by companies that work with AI will be used in ways that make them feel uncomfortable. A recent New York Times investigation found that the three major players in this race for more data, OpenAI, Google, and Meta, are willing to do almost anything to get their hands on data, including ignoring and in some cases violating corporate rules and wading into legal gray area. Risks of these data at all cost companies that have collected billions of data points put consumers' most sensitive data at risk just to train these AI algorithms. Last year, pharmaceutical company GoodRx was fined $1.5 million by the Federal Trade Commission for sharing customers' health data with Google, Facebook, and other third parties, even after pledging not to share user data. And earlier this year, the public learned that Google collected billions of personal records from Chrome incognito users after assuring them that their browsing information would not be tracked. Imposing strong legal and regulatory controls on this dangerous practice is vital to protect the privacy of every American, particularly women, the LGBTQ community, people of color, the poor, and other vulnerable communities. The most effective step to prevent harms from data brokerage for all Americans would be a strong, comprehensive policy. For example, the American Data Privacy and Protection Act, introduced in 2022, includes provisions to generally prohibit companies from transferring individuals' personal data without their affirmative express consent, and to establish a centralized registry through which consumers can opt out of the sale of some of their data by some third-party data brokers. It also includes requirements for companies to implement security practices to protect and secure personal data against unauthorized access. A comprehensive privacy law should also govern the use of public records and publicly available information, which can be sources of potential harm depending on the context, and especially when aggregated by data brokers. A piecemeal, state-by-state approach allows data brokers to continue collecting data on residents of states that have not yet passed privacy laws. Perhaps instead, a preemptive federal privacy law to prevent the collection and sale of consumer data without informed and clear consent across the country and for all U.S. persons could make a difference, though of course states would still be and are permitted to pass their own more restrictive legislation. In addition to a comprehensive privacy law, Congress and the executive branch should also consider more targeted controls focused specifically on the risks associated with data brokerage and the U.S. national security. For example, data brokers could be prohibited from collecting and selling identifiable data related to government employees and active duty service members for the purpose of sale to third parties, with a possible exception for circumstances in which it is deemed to be highly necessary, low risk, and well-defined. Congress and the executive branch should also consider how some particularly sensitive types of data, such as location data, are at risk of compromise when widely collected and aggregated in the first place. The Defense Department should assess the risk from data brokerages in its contracts, and in addition to legislative action, the Department of Defense should conduct an internal contractual data flow assessment of how it receives, transfers, and releases personal data about civilian employees and uniformed members of the military. The Federal Trade Commission is currently undergoing rulemaking on commercial surveillance and data security, drawing on its authorities under Section 5 of the FTC Act to enforce against unfair or deceptive business acts or practices. The FTC could implement rules preventing the re-identification of data unless the individual explicitly provided fully informed consent. Furthermore, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or CFPB, could aid in the research into data brokers by asking data brokers for information about their practices to shed further light on places where the regulation might be needed. The CFPB could also request information related to data streams, or the specific avenues in which brokers get the prevalence and development of SDKs, for example, how data brokers infer data points, how data brokers re-identify seemingly anonymous data, and how data on military service members is collected and sold, especially for credit and financial related data. I want to thank everyone who made it to the end of this video. Your support means the world to me. I'm looking forward to creating more great content, so please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.